to the sky like I play my...
It's been about 6 years since the release of Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire already. These are remakes of the original Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire on the Game Boy Advance, the Pokémon games that I played the most as a kid. These games weren't the first remake Pokémon games, of course, since we did have Fire Red and Leaf Green and Heart Gold and Soul Silver prior to them, but they do still stand out when compared to other remake Pokémon games, even if you compare them to Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Fire Red and Leaf Green are more of a one-to-one remake to the original games with some updated mechanics to keep up with the franchise, such as held items and abilities. And the same goes for Heart Gold and Soul Silver outside of some very minor changes as well. The stories were the exact same for the most part from their originals, of course, but that isn't exactly the case for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were more like reimagined versions of Hoenn, which makes it stand out a little bit more when compared to the other remake games in the franchise. It also helps that for whatever reason, Generation 3 nostalgia seems to be at an all-time high, even more so than Generation 2 nostalgia, strangely enough. Generation 1 easily takes the cake for Pokemon nostalgia, of course, since it was first, but I don't think Generation 3 is too far behind that. I think a lot of what has to do with Generation 3 nostalgia is the fact that they were the first Pokemon games on the Game Boy Advance, whereas Gold and Silver came out much later in their console's lifespan and a lot closer to release of the GBA. That's not to say that Generation 2 isn't great, however, but I definitely see a lot more people nostalgic for Generation 3 compared to Generation 2. In terms of the story for ORAS, however, ORAS follows the same general path as Ruby and Sapphire. Team Aqua and Team Magma are still planning to flood or dry up the world of all water, while it's your duty to stop them, all while pursuing your dream of becoming the Pokemon champion, because as we've established already, there's really no authority figures in Pokemon besides yourself. Like I said earlier though, this is not really a direct one-to-one remake despite it following the same general story and having mostly the same gym leaders, as there's still quite a few subtle differences to make the two games feel quite different from one another. First, if we compare ORAS to Emerald, which I know isn't technically Ruby and Sapphire, but if Heart Gold and Soul Silver could take elements from Crystal as well in their remakes, I don't see why ORAS couldn't have done the same with Pokemon Emerald. The big elephant in the room here would be the lack of Emerald Virgin's beloved Battle Frontier being included in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I'm not going to dwell on this point too much since I do have a full video on the Emerald Battle Frontier. If you want to check it out, it'll be linked in the description. But excluding the Battle Frontier from ORAS was a real shame. The thing that annoys me most about the exclusion though is how they tease you about it saying it's under construction when you head to the area where it normally would be. This led to some speculation about the Battle Frontier being in some sort of future DLC or something like that, but nope, we just never got it. I honestly would have preferred if they just left it out entirely without saying it was under construction or anything like that, since that only made it feel worse once we realized it was excluded. Instead, we got the Delta episode to act as Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire's post-game, which introduced us to a brand new character, Zinnia, and had a focus on going on outer space and capturing the legendary Pokemon or mythical Pokemon, depending on how you look at it, Deoxys. This was the first time Deoxys was obtainable in-game without any event or anything like that, and it was a nice little touch since I do remember there being rumors about being able to go into outer space in Ruby and Sapphire if you did something ridiculous at the Moss Deep Space Center. This was my generation's Mew is under the truck hoax, so seeing them make it a reality in the remakes was rather special. The Delta episode was definitely better than the Looker missions from the previous games X and Y, but I still prefer the Battle Frontier to them any day of the week. Another difference Emerald has was changing the 8th gym leader from Wallace to Juan, with Wallace then replacing Steven as the champion. ORAS keeps true with Ruby and Sapphire and has Wallace as the 8th gym leader, but the characters are so similar to one another that I don't even understand why they did this in the first place. They're both water gym leaders with very similar teams as you can see, and having the final gym battle be the same type as the final Hoenn League battle just seems a little bit off. If they wanted to change up the champion so bad, I don't see why they wouldn't have made someone like Wally the champion, since unlike Wallace, he is actually a more memorable and fan favorite character through the Pokemon franchise. These changes from Emerald being excluded in ORAS does make Emerald stand out a little bit more compared to ORAS, especially if we were to compare it to how Crystal is to Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but it also feels like a wasted opportunity to not include them in my opinion. Another big change from the originals was the complete revamping of Mauville City. This town looks nothing like the original Ruby and Sapphire and now acts like the token early big city you'd see early on in a Pokemon game, which has been pretty much a standard in every Pokemon game except for Ruby and Sapphire for whatever reason. I know we do have Mauville, which sort of acted like a big city because it had the game corner, I guess, and Lily Cove did have the department store, but Lily Cove was so later on and wasn't really much of a hub, so it was weird not having them in the originals. I really feel like this change did add a lot to Mauville City, transforming the city into a giant mall. It feels a lot more like a more compact and a lot less confusing Lumio City, which is very welcomed. The whole story behind Latios and Latias was different as well in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Instead of them being roaming legendary Pokemon that randomly appear after you beat the game, you're introduced to one of them by Steven depending on which version you're playing, while you're playing through the game on your way to Fortree City, which is right in the middle of the story. This does feel a little bit early on to be giving a strong legendary Pokemon like this, especially since you can also get Groudon or Kyogre before the Elite Four, but at the very least it did help tie in Mega Evolutions to these games to keep them more in line with Pokemon X and Y. The inclusion of Mega Pokemon does add a lot of continuity issues though, since ORAS focuses on the same characters and events as the original Ruby and Sapphire despite having these changes, yet it's still lacking the Battle Frontier while simultaneously having a very different Mauville City and including Mega Evolution. Apparently the explanation for this is that X and Y on Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire take place in an alternate Pokemon universe where Mega Pokemon exist in this universe but not in the Ruby and Sapphire universe, but in reality this is really just an excuse to keep Megas in the game since they couldn't really just ignore them until the very end of the game, except Sun and Moon actually did that kind of randomly, just sort of splashing Mega Evolutions on in the very end of the game. It was kind of weird how you went through that entire game with very little to no mention of Mega Evolution, and without having the ability to do it, and then once you beat the game, you just magically get the Mega Evolution. ORAS definitely handled it better, Sun and Moon, not so much. But then again, there's a lot of things that Sun and Moon didn't do very good in my opinion. And now, a quick word from our sponsors. Hey, you, do you enjoy this video? If you do, then you should totally leave a like and comment down below since it really does help the channel grow and it's the best way to support me. I'm personally not a big fan of accepting donations or having members or opening a Patreon or anything like that, so liking and commenting is by far the best way to support the channel and help see the channel grow. Consider subscribing as well so you don't miss any future content. Make sure you follow me on Twitter or Instagram if you want to, which will be linked in the description. And now, back to the video. One of the coolest things we did get out of these games were the new Mega Pokemon added into this game, since we had a lot more Megas added from X and Y. ORAS added 20 new Mega Evolutions on top of the existing 28 we already had. This makes ORAS feel more like a half step up from X and Y in terms of the generations, as it caused a significant change in the competitive battling metagame with all these new Pokemon. This made X and Y and ORAS have two very different metas, with ORAS being more like a Generation 6.5 because of this. A lot of the new Megas were based on Generation 3 Pokemon of course, such as Mega Salamence, Mega Sharpedo, and Mega Sableye amongst a lot of others, as well as some other Pokemon that were definitely very well deserving of a Mega, like Mega Beedrill and Mega Gallade. There were also a couple of move tutor moves and events added as well, all around making ORAS Online experience a lot different than X and Y. Another reason why people love Generation 3 so much is the music, of course. Generation 3 music feels the most unique and the easiest to distinguish out of any Pokemon music game in the franchise, and it only got better with the 3DS remakes enhancing them. I can't demonstrate this too well in this video unfortunately, but if you played both games, Ruby and Sapphire and then Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, you can definitely see how the music is between those two games, and how the upgraded music is a lot better. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire is also highly regarded as one of the better games in the entire Pokemon series to shiny hunt in, especially since the shiny hunting methods in games released after 2 Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire aren't nearly as well liked. I'm not much of a shiny hunter myself, but I did successfully shiny hunt in ORAS a handful of times and never again in any game after that. ORAS had plenty of legendary Pokemon to go after however, with these wormholes appearing in the sky when you would fly around your Latios or Latias. You were able to soft reset in front of these legendary Pokemon to find some shinies if you really wanted to, and there were quite a lot of them throughout the game. I never really bothered catching them all since there was actually quite a lot, and it was definitely a nice touch to include so many legendary Pokemon in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire since you really don't see that too often in most Pokemon games. To wrap things up, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are great Pokemon games and the most unique remake Pokemon games in the entire franchise. They aren't my personal favorite games, nor are they my favorite 3DS games, but as a kid who grew up largely with Ruby and Sapphire, I can really appreciate them for what they are. If you have a 3DS and you haven't played these games yet, I highly recommend that you do, even if you played the original games on the GBA or even if you played Pokemon Emerald already. They are a bit easier than those Game Boy Advance games of course, but they are still a ton of fun, and different enough to warrant playing. As I'm writing this video, the next games in line for remakes are going to be Pokemon Diamond and Pearl in the 4th generation. Right now, Diamond and Pearl have that same feeling that Ruby and Sapphire had in the 2012 to 2014 era leading up to their remakes, so hopefully soon we can have a Diamond and Pearl remake in the near future that handles more like how ORAS handled Ruby and Sapphire. I just really hope that Game Freak doesn't cut out the Battle Frontier from Pokemon Platinum for Generation 4 like they cut out the Pokemon Emerald Battle Frontier from Generation 3.